everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've been working on a display board commission where I'm recreating the entire hill of Amon Hen in 28mm scale. If you'd like to see more of that, I will have links below. I have become really fascinated by the world of book nooks. I collect and love the art of books, and I have a lot of them, so any opportunity to add more stuff to the shelf is really appealing. I decided to do a little project side quest and try and recreate the whole of Amon Hen inside a book nook. I documented the whole thing, so let's take a look at how the project went, and it will hopefully have some helpful tips and advice along the way. Cheers! So the first job was to get a book nook designed and cut. I wanted it to sit next to my other art books, so I worked out the size of what I wanted and roped in a friend of mine, Marcus, who works and teaches at the Fab Lab Makerspace in Sandwell in Birmingham. I'll put a link below for them. I got the pieces laser cut in 3mm plywood, as well as a front clear acrylic panel, and set them to one side until I decided on a finish that I was going for. Now the models I've created for this commission are for 28mm figures, which is suitable for Games Workshop's Middle-earth strategy battle game figures. And when I printed these originally, some of them are quite big and they had to be broken down into smaller pieces to fit on my print bed of my Lego Saturn. So we're going to have to rejig some of these things and rethink how we print them. With the book nook laser cut and ready as a template, I could use the dimensions of that to build a scale model in Maya, which would act as a stage for the models to be arranged in. So I recreated it in 3D, and this will allow us to kind of put all of our models in and work out the final scale that they need to be printed in so they'll fit into the nook perfectly. So I have all the 3D models of the pieces I need, but there are a few steps to get through before I can print them. When you move models around different packages, the scales can change. So here we are in Lychee, which is our slicer software for 3D printing. We need to take our boat here and we need to look at what happens to the size when we export it from Lychee into our 3D software into Maya and see what the scale difference is. And here's the boat we've imported into our scene in Maya. We have our units in Maya set up as millimeters so we can keep everything consistent. We can use a measuring tool in Maya to see what the distance is along X, because in Lychee we can see here the distance is 100 and in Maya it's 1000. So to match the scale we simply enter 0.1 of our model inside Maya. And we know then that using that scale means the model in Maya represents the exact size they are within that slicer. So I can import all of my models and use 0.1 scale and everything will match up. Any change to the scale from this point we can pass back to the models in the slicer so they print at the size that we need. I have imported all of the models into Maya and here they all are. I have had to group some together to make it easier to visualize them, and actually made new versions of others as solid pieces to make them easier to work with once they're printed. Each object uses a group node to move and scale them, because as you can see the group node acts as a blank canvas with everything reset. So any changes we make to the scale here are the ones we will use in the slicer for printing. I start by using a scale of 0.25 so 25% just to get the ball rolling. Here I'm moving and rotating the models to start to try and design the space. We can also create a basic landform to show us where they can sit in relation to each other and still have enough size to create that visual impact we're looking for. And of course, anything can happen from here and it may well change as we start the real construction, but we know because we have kept everything to scale that all of these models will work together within the space. Back in our slicer in Lychee, we can now start to transfer these scale differences to our models. Working our way through each one, scaling and rotating them suitable for printing. There were 3 full plates of models to print. I got them all sliced and ready for printing at 30 UM. Before printing, I checked over my FEP sheet, and luckily I did, because I found this. I'm going to get this changed over and set them off to print. The last thing I need right now is a leak. We can now start to clean the prints. I'm using a small tub of isopropyl alcohol, and then I use warm water to help to remove the supports before a final clean again in isopropyl alcohol, and then they're left to completely dry. These printed parts are too small for the cleaner, they'll get lost inside, so we'll use these tubs for now. Whilst those pieces dry, we can take a look at the parts which slot together really nicely along with an acrylic panel for the front. I got some Jacobean walnut sandal in wood stain and a clean microfiber cloth. and I'm going to put 2 coats of this onto each piece, and I'm going to follow that up with a couple of coats of gloss varnish to protect it and also give it a really nice finish. I used a black primer for the inside of the panels, and here we can see the final finish of the wood. I'm really happy with it. I think it looked really nice on the shelf. At this point, all of the models had dried and been cured, so I could move on to building the basic shape of the hill using foam. The foam I'm using is insulation board, and it has a silver layer on the top and bottom, but that's pretty easy to remove. Just be sure to wear goggles and some kind of respirator or mask for this stuff, it's pretty nasty. For now we can measure the size of the first block with another kit I had made. That can then be used as a template for the others. Removing the silver layer is straightforward too. And we can see here that we have a good volume as a starting point to carve out the hill using our front panel as reference. I started to carve out the pieces of foam using the models to help me decide where to place them and create the shape of the terrain. I took the bottom layer and used Gorilla Glue to bond it to the wooden base. I used some heavy material tubs to keep it in place as it expands and as it dries, but I should have used weights as it expanded out everywhere, so I probably used too much, but never mind. I can cut away anything we don't want and clean it all up. I used cocktail sticks and high-grade PVA glue to add smaller pieces to build up the main structure to accommodate the models the way I wanted them situated on the hill. I started to place and make space for some resin rocks. These rocks I sell in my store and they're great for creating small scale miniature rocks and cliffs because they're packed with details and really lightweight. Before I could move on to the next section where I create the landform, I glued together the scene seat ready for placing onto the top of the hill. So we have the foam pieces all glued with space laid out to add the Resin Rocks, and we now need to tie all of this together into a coherent piece and add some of the larger models. For this we will be using the Geek Gaming modelling compound, a paper and plaster mix which you add water to create a paste. You are looking to make the consistency of tuna mayonnaise. This goes hard within about 5 minutes, so just mix small quantities as you go, and after a few minutes when it's dried, use a brush or a finger with a bit of water on to smooth things over. I added a bit too much water to mine, but don't worry, it just takes a little bit long to dry. I have added a bit of water to the contact point of the models to help them bond to the compound and set them in place. The compound can also be used to build out any gaps in the foam where the rocks sit, and again, adding a bit of water to where they contact the compound will help set them all in place. This is really the magic of this product, because you go from a set of models, rocks and foam to one complete unified surface. It's really great. Unfortunately, I lost a few parts of this section due to a corrupt video card, but from this point I went back and glued down the other smaller pieces into place and got ready for priming. I started by giving the piece a coat of black primer using Chaos Black from GW. I will add the materials to links below for anyone interested in what I'm using for the project. Some of these will be affiliate links, which means that it costs you nothing extra, but gives the channel a little kickback and helps to fund future projects like this one. Once dry, I added a bit of zenithal highlighting using Corax White, spraying mainly from the top and at a slightly diagonal direction. This is to simulate a light source used to help create the lighter and dark areas of a model. But for our purposes, I really want to see the details of the smaller pieces, and using this technique I find really helpful for that. For painting the stonework, I used a wet palette for painting the base coats for the models, as I could keep the paint to a more watery consistency, so I could try my best to avoid a chalky finish with too much buildup of paint. I started by applying a layer of Citadel Dawnstone to all of the stonework. I added a wash of Nuln Oil. I left that to dry for around half an hour to 45 minutes before coming back in with a dry brush of Administratum Grey and White Scar. Again, all of these links will be below. To weather the stonework, I then used 2 layers of washes, contrast Militarum Green and contrast Skeleton Horde. I added splashes of each and removed most of it with a paper towel. We don't want to overdo this stage, but we do need to present the stonework's final look that tells us that this has been sat there aging in nature for some time. For the Elven boats given by Galadriel, I wanted to try and recreate the look of the colour, which is a bit of a light blue-brown texture. I'm no expert, but I will try and make it look correct. I started with a mix of white scar and Fenrisian grey. I then added a layer of contrast apothecary white, and I finished that up with a layer of contrast skeleton horde. For the rocks and cliffs, I painted a layer of army painted uniform grey all over the rock faces, followed by a wash of Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade added at the same time. And then dry brushed over with white scar. In the film there are small rocks along the shore, so I'm going to use the Woodland Scenic's fine ballast for this. Using the Geek Gaming fast drying basing glue, I will add some to the area around the boats and shoreline ruins, using an old brush to move the glue around and then scatter the rocks. I will try and add some clumping too to show that the ground is uneven and remove any which have dropped onto the boats. Next, I added some areas to put down some Geek Gaming base ready forest path ground cover. This is great because it has a mix of some larger and smaller bits which can be used to simulate areas where there may be more rocks and harder ground material, like around the cliffs and outcrops and towards the shoreline. I then added more glue and sprinkled some Geek Gaming Sawdust scatter earth and ground. This gives enough texture to make it look like a forest floor, adding it also to overlap the last layer of the forest path ground cover. All of these little details with a mix of base readies will make the whole piece come to life. While all of that is left to dry, we're going to turn our attention to the pine trees. This is super simple and really gives you some nice results with some randomness built in so the trees don't all look too uniform, which will be perfect. With all the effort put in so far, these trees really need to look the part. For this we need some bumpy fuzzy pipe cleaners and a good pair of scissors. The bumps on these and the cone shape of the bristles lends itself perfectly to what we need it for. Cut the end off and then cut the piece off to make the first tree, slightly longer than you would like it. Using scissors, shape it by cutting diagonally towards the centre of the tip of the tree. Once you are happy with the shape, pull the bottom parts off to reveal the twisted metal underneath. That's what we're going to use to plant it into the foam. Once you are happy with it, move on to the next or however many you are making. You can get 2 good sized trees out of each section and shape them as you want. Once you have an army of little trees, push the stems into some spare polystyrene or foam and line them up spaced out for the next stage. I used some Paint Factory polyurethane varnish clear gloss next. This is the same stuff I used to gloss varnish the plywood for the Nook. I'll add a link for that as well. I gave it a good coat, working my way up and down in between the line of trees, and what happens is that the bristles firstly become much harder, which is what we need when we paint them to keep that nice shape, but they also clump together and separate, and you can see these really nice random finishes to them, which I think look really fantastic. Once they are dry, I use some cheap rattle can black spray. The black undercoat will give us shadows underneath our top layers of paint to create some depth. For painting, I use a cheap makeup brush to stipple on some layers of paint onto the outside bristles only to keep that natural shadowing from the black below. I started by using Citadel Dryad Bark. This is used to simulate the dead branches at the very bottom of the trees. Next, added a layer of Caliban Green. This is a great base colour for these. I then used some Castellan Green to pick out a few areas over the last coat just lightly. A final stipple of army paint at Goblin Green is used at the top and in some other smaller areas to simulate new growth. These look really fantastic, and the process lends itself well to doing batches of these together. With the flocking dry, we are now ready to grab a hand drill and a suitable sized bit and begin to drill into the foam to start placing trees. I try and find places where I can add them without obscuring anything too much. Continuing to place them and check what the view looks like from the front, I add more and more to populate the forest. Around the back of the scene seat, I added a few more to frame that area too. I'm not gluing anything at this point, I'm just placing them for now. To simulate fallen pines and other vegetation around the base of the tree, I used some Geek Gaming base ready pine forest ground cover, using the finer parts to work better with the scale. I lifted out each tree one at a time, standing a small drill bit in its place while I spread out some glue, sprinkled over the pine forest ground cover. Replacing the tree with the drill bit, it will pull some of that glue back down with it into place inside the foam. As I work around the piece, repeating the process, little bits of the pine base ready will fall into other places, and that's fine. It all adds to the rich tapestry of colour and texture we're creating. This is where we are so far, and I'm really happy with it. Once all of the flocking was dry, it was time to seal it all in place. I'm using the Geek Gaming Matte Scenic Spray, saturating the whole piece. I use a paper towel to remove larger areas over the rocks. And I used a pipette to add more into dense areas to make sure it penetrated down through each layer, and then that was left overnight to fully dry. I just want to sort this edge out before we move on. The line where the flock has been added is just too clean, so I'm going to quickly add a bit of the grey we used to feather it out a little, and then I'm going to add a quick wash so it ties back in. I sprayed the inside of the wood panels with a black primer, and it's a little patchy, and what I want to do is create a clear distinction between the model and the box when you look inside. I'm going to test out this paint called Black 3.0, and it's from Culture Hustle. From what I've seen, it's really impressive and provides a really smooth deep black. I painted 2 coats onto the wood, as well as the foam and exposed wood parts on the base. I glued the pieces of the box using PVA and clamped it all together and to hold it into shape while it dried. The box itself is a laser cut kit, so the pieces just slot together, and I had to sand back some of the joints because I had a build-up of paint which had seeped into there. I left it overnight to dry before moving on to the final parts, the lights. I got this idea from Nat One's video when he made his Lord of the Rings book Nook, which I'll link below. I got a remote control LED light strip from Amazon, which has a colour changer, The lid of the Nook sits on some little brackets, so we can use that entire surface to lay out the lights. The back of the lights have a sticky surface I'm using to attach them to the wood, running the strips up and down then across where possible to provide the maximum amount of light. There is a brightness controller, so we can add as much light as possible and then dim them down afterwards if we need to. Once I have as many attached as possible, I can snip it here and remove any excess. A nice feature of these light strips though is how easy it is to extend them if required. You can use these LED strip pin connectors, push in each end where you have cut the strip and clamp them down, and you can extend them if you need to, which is really great. But with that, let's see what it looks like.